In this example, we are going to look at how to perform file uploads using GraphQL. The GraphQL spec doesn't talk about how to upload files. The typical multi-part requests that are used in REST APIs cannot be applied in the GraphQL queries. So in this example, we are going to make use of base64 encoding of files, which the client will send from the frontend, and the server can base64 decode the file and persist it somewhere or upload it to a cloud server, right? So we have a files table where we're going to store the file path after uploading it somewhere. So the server is supposed to return a file path post uploading it. Now to do this, we are going to create a custom mutation which will perform the file upload and give back the file path to the client. So I'm going to go to the Actions tab to create a new action. And I'm going to name my custom mutation as file upload. And I'm going to have 3 arguments. There will be a name for the file, and there will be a type, which is the content type of the file. And finally, I'll have a base64 string, which will be sent from the frontend. And I'll have an output type, file output, which will return a file path. And I can remove the sample output. And in my handler, I'm going to say the route is file upload, and I'm going to click on create. The action has been created successfully. So let's go ahead to CodeGen and download the boilerplate kit to get started. I'm going to download the starter kit. I'm going to say wget, and I'm going to unzip the code snippet. All right, let's do an npm install to install the modules. All right, let's look at the code snippet to understand. And there is a hello route already defined. So we need to create a new route to handle this file upload. So I'm going to say app.post of file/file upload, and I'm going to give a file upload function. Now let's define the file upload function. And I'm going to receive 3 input arguments, which will be available in the input object. So they are the name, type, and base64 string that we defined in the custom mutation. Now I'm going to put the file contents in a buffer using the buffer.from method, and I'm going to pass the base64 string and use the base64 encoding to. Now using this file buffer, we can upload the file to S3 or Google Cloud or any cloud storage. For simplicity, we are going to make use of file system to persist the files locally. So I'm going to import the fs module. Then I'm going to make use of fs.writeFileSync to give the file path and the name and the file buffer with the encoding type. So we need a folder called public/files to store the files in the file system. So I'm going to create a new folder called public. And inside public, I'll have a folder called files. Now we need to configure Express to say that this is a static folder so that it can be served through Express. So I'm going to say express.static and then give the public folder to act as a static folder. Now all files inside the public folder can be accessed directly using relative URLs. Now let's run this Express app to check if a basic file upload is writing the files into the folders. So I'm going to say npm start. I have a React app running which accepts a file input, and it makes a GraphQL mutation to upload the file. The React app does the base64 encoding before sending the file to the server. So I'm going to choose a file. Let me choose the Docker Compose, and let's click on upload. Now let's look at the public folder to see if the files have been created, and you can see that the Docker Compose file has been created. Now let's look at the React code a bit to understand what is happening in the mutation. In my React app, I have a form which has an input type file, and there is an onChange method to update the state. So this onChange method sets the file state, and we're using the file reader API to read the files as a binary string. And using the onload method, we are converting the result to a base64 encoded string, and we're storing it in a local state. And finally, when you're doing an onSubmit, we are doing a file upload call, which is basically making a mutation. So we are forming the variables for the mutation, and we're making a post request. So let's look at the mutation. This is the action that we defined in Hasura, which accepts 3 arguments: the name, type, and the base64 string. And the mutation name is file upload, and it returns a file path. So we are sending the base64 string as part of the variables, and this lets the Express server to receive this as an input and store it in a public folder. Now let's go back to the Express code to actually make a mutation back to the database to update the file path. Now let's try out the mutation in GraphQL to see how the insert looks like. I'm going to go to GraphQL and try out the mutation to insert a file. So I'm saying insert files one, and I'm giving an object which accepts a file path, and ideally my server will give the files path which will be used to insert into the files table, and the returning will give me an ID of the file. Now we'll use this mutation in our code to make the insert into the table. I'm declaring the Hasura mutation which will insert into the files table, and I have a variables object which will give the file path as an input. So we're getting the file path from the request body name. Now I'm going to import the fetch API to make a post request to the GraphQL API. So this is my fetch API. I'm sending a mutation to the Hasura GraphQL endpoint. I'm giving in the variables that we've declared above. Now we are resolving the fetch API to get the data and error object. And if there is an error, return an error message, which Hasura returns. And if it's a success, then return the file path back to the client by saying file underscore path and give the files and the name. So here you will probably be using your cloud storage URL when you're returning back the response to the client. Now let's test this by going back to the React app and making a file upload and to see if a file is being added to the database. So I'm going to use the React app to upload the same file. Now I can see that the file has been uploaded, and I can also render it. Now let's go ahead to the database to see if the file has been added. And as you can see, we've got the file path updated here. This file path is a relative URL to our Express server, but this could ideally be our cloud storage URL. Using base64 encoding is one of the ways to approach this file upload problem in GraphQL. And that's it for today's example. We'll catch up in a different example.